When Clara Hale threw a pot of boiling stew into Boone Cutter's face, 40 cowboys went silent. The woman they'd spent 3 weeks mocking, the heavy, quiet stranger who couldn't meet anyone's eyes, stood over the screaming man with the ladle still gripping in her shaking hand. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. And in that frozen moment, Clara realized something that terrified her more than Boone's rage. She wasn't going to run anymore. This is the story of a woman the world tried to break, and the frontier ranch that saved her soul. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The dust arrived first. Elias Mercer saw it from the north pasture, a thin brown cloud rising against the late afternoon sky like smoke from a distant fire. He straightened from the fence post he'd been hammering, wiped sweat from his forehead with a sleeve that had more holes than fabric, and squinted toward the road. Visitors were rare at Black Hollow Ranch. Wanted visitors were rarer still. The wagon that emerged from the dust 15 minutes later looked like it had been dragged through hell backwards. One wheel wobbled, the canvas cover hung in tatters. The mule pulling it moved with the exhausted shuffle of an animal that had given up arguing with fate. 2 women sat on the bench seat. Elias didn't move from where he stood. His hand drifted to the rifle leaning against the fence post, not grabbing it, just acknowledging its presence. Out here, 60 miles from anything resembling civilization, you learn to trust your instincts before your manners. The wagon stopped 30 feet from him. The dust caught up, swirling around the mule's legs. The woman holding the reins was maybe 50, thin as a fence rail, with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her dress had been mended so many times the original color was anyone's guess, but her eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who'd spent years watching for trouble. "Help you?" Elias called out. "I hope so." Her voice carried the flat accent of someone from back east. Missouri, maybe. "My name is Vivian Hale. This is my daughter, Clara." Elias's gaze shifted to the second woman. She sat hunched on the far side of the bench, head down, hands folded in her lap. Late 20s, he guessed. Heavy set, with dark hair escaping from a bun at her neck. She wore a brown dress that had seen better years and kept her eyes fixed on her knees like the ground might open up if she looked anywhere else. "Ma'am," Elias said, addressing Vivian but still watching both of them. "What brings you out to Black Hollow?" "Desperation," Vivian said simply. "We need work. We need a place to stay. We'll take anything you've got." Elias let out a slow breath through his nose. He glanced back at the ranch house, a 2-story structure that had been impressive once, before the paint peeled and the porch sagged and the whole thing started leaning slightly to the west like a drunk trying to stay upright. "I don't have work," he said, "barely keeping myself fed. We'll work for room and board." Vivian's voice didn't beg, but something in it came close. "We can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. We're not asking for wages, just a roof and food." "Where's your husband?" "Dead, 3 months now." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He wasn't much good alive." Vivian's jaw tightened. "We've been traveling since, trying to find somewhere that'll take us in. Nobody wants—" She stopped herself. "We're clean, honest, hard workers. We won't cause you trouble." Elias looked at Clara again. The daughter still hadn't raised her head. She sat there like a woman who'd learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. Something about that made his chest tighten. "I've got debts," he said slowly. "Bank's breathing down my neck. Winter's coming and I'm short on feed, short on hands, short on everything. This ranch is one bad season from going under." "Then you need help," Vivian said. "I need money. Help doesn't pay the bank." "No, but it keeps you alive long enough to find money." Elias studied her. The woman had a point. He looked at his ranch, at the broken fences, the barn door hanging crooked, the cattle scattered across pastures that needed riding every day to keep track of them. His last ranch hand had quit 6 weeks ago after Elias couldn't pay him. Since then, Elias had been working dawn to midnight trying to hold everything together. He was losing. "All right," he said finally. 1 month, room and board. If it doesn't work out, we part ways clean. Deal?" Vivian nodded. "Deal. There's a bunkhouse out back. It's not fancy. We'll take it." Elias walked toward the wagon, extending his hand to help Vivian down. She took it with a firm grip. Clara finally moved, climbing down on the other side without assistance. She still didn't look at him. "Clara," Vivian said sharply, "show some manners." The daughter flinched. Then slowly, she raised her head. Elias saw her face for the first time. She wasn't pretty by the standards men used in saloons. Her features were plain, her cheeks full, her expression guarded, but her eyes caught him off balance. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held something he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror. Grief. The kind that settled into your bones and never quite left. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Sir?" she whispered. Her voice was so soft he almost missed it. Then her gaze dropped back to the ground. Black Hollow was a town that God had forgotten, and the devil didn't want. It squatted in a valley between two ridges of scrub-covered hills, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together during a windstorm and never quite settled right. Main Street ran a quarter-mile from the train depot on the south end to the church on the north, with a general store, 2 saloons, a bank, a hotel, and a scattering of houses in between. 300 people called it home. Most of them wished they lived somewhere else. Elias rode into town 2 days after the Hale women arrived, leading a pack horse loaded with furs he'd trapped last winter. He needed supplies: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, and he needed credit to buy them because his cash had run out sometime around July. He tied the horses outside Morrison's general store and walked in. The bell above the door jangled. 3 women standing near the fabric counter stopped talking mid-sentence and turned to stare at him. Elias recognized them. Sarah Brennan, wife of the saloon owner, Margaret Cole, married to a rancher north of town, and Helen Pritchard, whose husband ran the bank. "Ladies," he said, touching the brim of his hat. They didn't respond, just stared. Elias walked past them toward the counter where Jacob Morrison stood sorting tins of tobacco. Morrison was a lean man in his 60s with a permanently sour expression, like he'd spent his whole life biting into lemons. "Need supplies, Jacob?" Morrison didn't look up. "Cash or credit?" "Credit." "Can't do it." Elias stopped. "What?" "Your account's closed. As of yesterday." "The hell it is. I've had credit here for 8 years. Morrison finally met his eyes. "Not anymore." Behind Elias, one of the women whispered something. Another one giggled. Elias turned slowly. All 3 were watching him with expressions that mixed contempt and something uglier, something that looked like satisfaction. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. Margaret Cole spoke first. She was a tall woman, handsome in a cold way, with blonde hair pinned up in an elaborate arrangement. "We heard you took in some strangers, Mr. Mercer." "That's my business." "It becomes our business when you bring corruption onto our land." Elias stared at her. "Corruption." "That woman," Helen Pritchard said. Her voice dripped with disgust. "The heavy one. Do you even know what she is?" "She's a woman looking for work." "She's ruined," Sarah Brennan hissed. "Everyone can see it. A woman her age, unmarried, traveling with just her mother. She's carrying shame, Mr. Mercer, and you've welcomed it into your home." "I've welcomed 2 people who needed help." Kohu. "You've welcomed sin," Margaret interrupted, "and now the whole town knows it. Don't expect decent people to trade with you while you're harboring filth." The anger that rose in Elias's chest was familiar. He'd felt it before, when his father drank himself to death, when his brother was killed in a pointless range war, when the bank first threatened foreclosure. It was the kind of anger that made a man's vision narrow and his hands curl into fists. But he'd learned over the years that anger didn't solve problems. It just created new ones. "Those women haven't done anything to you," he said evenly. "They don't have to," Helen said. "Just being what they are is enough." Elias looked at Jacob Morrison. "You really closing my credit because of this nonsense?" Morrison shrugged. "I run a business, Elias. Can't afford to upset my customers. I've been a customer for 8 years. And these ladies have been customers longer." Elias stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of their stares. Then he turned and walked out without another word. He made it halfway to his horse before Margaret Cole's voice followed him through the open door. "You should send them away, Mr. Mercer, before they drag you down with them." Elias didn't respond. He untied the horses, climbed into the saddle, and rode out of Black Hollow with his supplies still sitting on Morrison's shelves. The whole ride home, he tried to figure out how the hell he was going to survive the winter. Fact, Clara was in the barn when he returned. Elias found her mucking out stalls with the kind of methodical intensity that suggested she'd been doing it for hours. Sweat darkened the back of her dress. Her hair had come loose from its bun and hung in damp strands around her face. She didn't notice him at first. She just kept working, shoveling, hauling, dumping. Her breath came hard but steady. "You don't have to do that," Elias said from the doorway. Clara spun around, startled. The shovel clattered to the ground. "Sorry," Elias said quickly. "Didn't mean to scare you." She bent to retrieve the shovel without meeting his eyes. "It's all right. How long have you been out here?" "Since breakfast." That was 6 hours ago. Elias walked into the barn, studying the stalls she'd already finished. They were cleaner than they'd been in months. Maybe years. The old straw had been hauled out, the floors scraped, fresh bedding laid down. She'd even repaired a broken slat in the third stall. "You did all this yourself?" Clara nodded. "It's good work." She didn't respond, just gripped the shovel tighter. Elias leaned against a support beam, suddenly tired. "Went into town today. Tried to get supplies." "Did you?" "No." He paused. "People there have strong opinions about you and your mother." Clara's shoulders stiffened. "I know. They don't even know you. Doesn't matter." Her voice was quiet, defeated. "People always know. Or they think they do. It's the same thing in the end." "What do they think they know?" Clara finally looked at him. Her eyes held something broken. "That I'm ruined. That I bring shame wherever I go. That decent people shouldn't have anything to do with me." "Are you?" Elias asked. "Ruined? Does it matter?" "I'm asking." Clara set the shovel against the wall. Her hands were shaking. "I was engaged once, back in Missouri. His name was Thomas. We were going to be married in the spring." She stopped, swallowed. "His family owned the farm next to ours. We grew up together. I thought he loved me." "What happened?" "I loved him too much. Trusted him too much." Her voice cracked. "I gave him everything I had to give. And then his father found out and decided I wasn't good enough for their family after all. Thomas didn't argue. He just let them send me away." Elias said nothing. There wasn't anything to say. "My father beat me when he found out," Clara continued. "Called me every name there is to call a woman. Said I'd ruined the family, ruined myself. When he died 3 months ago, people said it was my shame that killed him. Maybe they're right, maybe—" "Stop!" Elias's voice came out harder than he intended. "Just stop." Clara looked at him, startled. "You made a mistake," Elias said. "You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That doesn't make you ruined. It makes you human. The world doesn't see it that way. The world's full of fools." A strange sound escaped Clara's throat, half laugh, half sob. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Elias stepped closer. "I don't care what those people in town think. You and your mother need a place to stay, and I need help. That's all that matters. Understand?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." Elias picked up the shovel she'd dropped. "Now get out of this barn and go eat something. You've done enough for one day." She hesitated, then walked past him toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. "Mr. Mercer? Yeah?" "Thank you." Elias shrugged. "Haven't done anything worth thanking me for." "Yes," Clara said softly. "You have." Then she was gone. Elias stood alone in the barn, listening to her footsteps fade. He looked around at the clean stalls, the repaired walls, the fresh bedding. Maybe, he thought, hiring the Hale women wasn't the worst decision he'd ever made, even if it was going to cost him everything. The first snow came early that year. It started in mid-October, fat flakes drifting down from a sky the color of old pewter. By morning, 3 inches covered the ground. By evening, 6. Elias spent the day moving cattle to lower pastures where they could find shelter and forage. Clara and Vivian worked beside him without complaint, bundled in coats too thin for the cold. They pushed through snowdrifts, herded stubborn steers, and didn't stop until every animal was accounted for. When they finally trudged back to the ranch house after dark, Elias's hands were numb, and his face felt like frozen leather. Clara's lips had gone blue. Vivian was shivering so hard her teeth clicked, but the cattle were safe. Inside, Clara made coffee while Vivian started a fire. Elias collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table and pulled off his boots. His socks were soaked through. "We'll need to check the herd again tomorrow," he said. "Make sure none wandered off." "I'll go," Clara said, pouring coffee into 3 tin cups. "You and Mama can handle things here. It's a 2-person job." "Then Mama can come with me." Elias started to argue, then stopped. Clara had proven herself tougher than he'd expected. In the 3 weeks since she'd arrived, she'd worked harder than most men he'd hired. She didn't complain, didn't make excuses. She just put her head down and did whatever needed doing. And slowly, almost without him noticing, she'd stopped avoiding his eyes. "All right," he said, "but if the weather turns worse, you come straight back. Don't try to be heroes." "We won't," Vivian said, settling into the chair across from him. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and sighed. "Lord, I'm getting too old for this. You did fine today." "I did adequate. There's a difference." She took a sip, winced at the heat. "How bad is it, Mr. Mercer? With the bank, I mean." Elias hadn't told them about the debt, hadn't seen the point in worrying them with problems that weren't theirs. "Bad enough," he admitted. "How much time do you have?" 2 months, maybe 3 if I can convince them to extend." "And if you can't?" "Then I lose the ranch." He said it flatly, like he was talking about the weather. "Everything my father built, everything I've spent 10 years trying to hold together, gone." Vivian studied him. "What will you do?" "Don't know. Hire out as a ranch hand somewhere, I guess. Start over." He laughed bitterly. "I'm 34 years old and I'll be starting over like a kid fresh off the farm." "It's not your fault," Clara said quietly. She'd been standing by the stove, so still Elias had almost forgotten she was there. "The drought, the cattle prices, none of that was in your control. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. Bank doesn't care about excuses." "No," Clara agreed. "They don't." Something in her voice made Elias look at her. She was staring into her coffee cup with an expression he couldn't read. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There's a cattle drive heading north in 2 weeks. Big one. 3,000 head going to the railhead at Dodge City." "So?" "They're looking for a camp cook, posted notices in town." Elias frowned. "How do you know that?" "I heard some men talking at the general store last time we went for supplies." Clara set her cup down carefully. "The pay is good, real good. $150 for the full drive." Vivian sucked in a breath. "Clara, no." "It's 3 months of work," Clara continued, still not looking at either of them. "Maybe 4 depending on weather, but $150 would cover most of the debt." "Absolutely not," Elias said. Clara finally met his eyes. "Why not?" "Because cattle drives are brutal. Men die on them. And you're—" He stopped himself. "A woman?" Clara's voice was calm. "Yes, I am. But I can cook better than any man you'll find, and I'm stronger than I look. I can do this." "It's not about what you can do," Elias said. "It's about what those men will do to you. 40 cowboys on the trail for 3 months? You wouldn't last a week." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He stood up, anger rising despite himself. "I've worked cattle drives, Clara. I know what they're like. The language, the drinking, the—" He shook his head. "I won't let you do it." "You won't let me?" Clara's voice went hard. "I'm not your property, Mr. Mercer. You don't get to let me do anything. I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection." The words came out louder than she'd probably intended. She took a breath, steadied herself. "I've spent my whole life being protected. Protected from shame, from gossip, from the world. And where did it get me? Hiding in barns, afraid to meet anyone's eyes, letting people treat me like dirt because I was too scared to stand up. This is different." "No, it's not." Clara's hands were shaking again, but not from cold this time. "You need money. I can earn it. That's all that matters." Elias looked at Vivian for support. The older woman just shook her head. "She's made up her mind," Vivian said quietly. "Once she does that, there's no talking her out of it. Trust me." Elias turned back to Clara. "If something happens to you, then it happens. Clara said. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have done something that mattered instead of just existing. Her voice broke on the last word. Elias stood there, wanting to argue, wanting to forbid it, wanting to do anything except let this stubborn woman ride off into danger. But he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror every morning for the past year, the look of someone who is tired of losing. 3 months, he said finally. You sign on for 3 months. If it gets bad, if those men give you trouble, you leave. You come straight back here. Deal? Clara nodded. Deal. I mean it, Clara. First sign of real trouble, you walk away. I will. She was lying. They both knew it. But Elias didn't call her on it. He just nodded and walked out of the kitchen, needing air, needing space, needing to be somewhere he didn't have to watch a woman he was starting to care about prepare to ride into hell. But Clara signed on with the cattle drive 5 days later. The trail boss was a man named Wade Hollister, 60 years old, leather-skinned, with gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. He looked Clara up and down when she approached his camp, taking in her size, her worn clothes, her nervous hands. You the one wants to cook? He asked. Yes, sir. Ever worked a drive before? No, sir. Ever cooked for 40 men? No, sir. Hollister spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Why should I hire you? Because I'll work harder than anyone you've got, Clara said. I'll be up before dawn, and I won't quit until the last man's fed. I don't drink, I don't complain, and I can make decent food out of nothing. You won't find better. You're a woman. I noticed. A couple of nearby cowboys laughed. Hollister silenced them with a look. Men on the trail get rough, he said. They curse, they fight, they say things that'd make a preacher faint. You gonna cry every time someone hurts your feelings? No, sir. You going to expect special treatment because you're female? No, sir. Hollister studied her for another long moment. Then he shrugged. All right, 150 for the full drive. You get your own wagon, your own supplies. You keep up or you get left behind. Understood? Understood. We leave in 4 days, dawn. Don't be late. Clara nodded and walked back to where Elias was waiting with the wagon. He'd driven her into town but hadn't said a word the whole ride. Just sat there, jaw tight, staring at the road. I got it, she said, climbing onto the bench beside him. Elias flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward. They were halfway home before he finally spoke. You don't have to do this. Yes, Clara said, I do. Why? She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the lines around his eyes, the slump in his shoulders, the weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. Because you gave me a chance when nobody else would, she said quietly. Because you didn't judge me, didn't turn me away. You just let me be human. That's not a reason to risk your life. It's the only reason that matters. Elias said nothing, but his hands tightened on the reins. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Bon. The night before Clara left, Vivian made her daughter's favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, the way they used to have back in Missouri before everything fell apart. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, barely talking. The food tasted like sawdust in Elias's mouth. After dinner, Clara went out to the barn to check on the horse she'd be riding. Elias followed her. He found her brushing the animal with slow, careful strokes. The horse, a sturdy bay mare, stood patiently, eyes half closed. She's a good horse, Elias said. Clara nodded. I'm putting together supplies for your wagon, flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. Everything you'll need. Thank you. There's a rifle in there too. You know how to use it? My father taught me. Good. Elias leaned against a stall door. Clara, don't, she said softly. Please don't try to talk me out of it again. I wasn't going to. He paused. I was going to say, be careful. Clara stopped brushing. She stood there, back to him, shoulders tense. I will, she whispered. Those men, they're going to make this hard for you. They're going to test you, push you, try to break you down. I know. Don't let them. Elias's voice was fierce. You're stronger than they think, stronger than you think. Don't forget that. Clara turned around. Her eyes were wet. What if I fail? She asked. What if I can't do it? What if... You won't fail. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Elias stepped closer. You know how I know? Because you're the kind of person who finishes what she starts. You don't quit. You don't run. Even when the world's kicking you down, you get back up. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. She wiped it away roughly. The ranch will still be here when you get back, Elias said. We'll figure out the rest. But I need you to come back. Understand? Clara nodded. Promise me. I promise. Elias wanted to say more. Wanted to tell her that somewhere over the past month, she'd become more than just hired help. That he looked forward to seeing her at breakfast, to hearing her quiet voice, to watching her face when she thought nobody was looking and her guard came down. But he didn't know how to say any of that without sounding like a fool. So he just squeezed her shoulder once, gently, and walked back to the house. Behind him, Clara stood in the barn with one hand pressed to where he'd touched her, crying silently in the dark. The cattle drive left Black Hollow at dawn under a sky streaked red and gold. 3,000 head of cattle, 40 cowboys, 6 supply wagons, and one woman who everyone expected to quit before the first week was out. Clara drove the cook wagon at the rear of the column, her mother beside her. They'd argued about that, Vivian insisting on coming along, Clara insisting she stay at the ranch. In the end, Vivian won. She always did. Elias stood on the ridge above town and watched them go. He watched until the dust settled and the last wagon disappeared over the horizon. Then he turned and rode back to the ranch alone, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The work helped. Elias threw himself into it, repairing fences, chopping firewood, checking cattle, fixing everything that had been broken for months. He worked until his hands bled and his back screamed, worked until exhaustion dragged him into sleep. It still didn't stop him from thinking about Clara. A week after she left, the banker showed up. His name was Vernon Pritchard, husband of the woman who'd called Clara ruined at the general store. He rode out to the ranch in a buggy, dressed in a black suit, looking like an undertaker coming to measure a corpse. Elias met him in the yard. Mr. Mercer, Pritchard said, not bothering to get down from the buggy, we need to discuss your loan. What about it? The bank has decided to call it in. Full payment due in 60 days. Elias went very still. That's not what we agreed. I have until February. Circumstances have changed. What circumstances? Pritchard's smile was thin and cold. The bank has concerns about your ability to manage this property responsibly. Given recent choices you've made regarding who you associate with, we feel it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter sooner rather than later. The rage that filled Elias was white-hot and bottomless. Get off my land, he said quietly. I'll need your answer by... I said get off my land. Elias's hand moved toward his hip, where his revolver hung. Now. Pritchard's face went pale. He grabbed the reins, turned the buggy, and drove away fast enough to kick up dust. Elias stood there shaking with fury. They were going to take everything. Not because he couldn't pay, he would have paid, given time, but because he dared to show kindness to people the town had rejected. This was punishment. This was how Black Hollow worked. You obeyed, or you were destroyed. Elias walked back to the house, poured himself a drink with hands that wouldn't quite steady, and stared out the window at the land his father had died protecting. 60 days. Claire had been gone for 7. She had 3 months ahead of her, maybe more. And he had 60 days to save a ranch that was already lost. The first bottle of whiskey went down easier than it should have. The second one barely touched the howling emptiness that had opened up inside him. By midnight, Elias Mercer sat alone in the dark, drunk and desperate, wondering if this was what giving up felt like. Wondering if Clara was all right. Wondering if he'd ever see her again. And knowing deep in his bones that he'd lost her before he ever really had her at all. The first night on this trail, nobody spoke to Clara except to bark orders. Coffee's weak. Beans are burnt. You got any cornbread or just this slop? She took it without responding, kept her head down, served the food, cleaned the pots. Vivian worked beside her in grim silence, the two of them moving through the camp like ghosts nobody wanted to acknowledge. The cowboys sat in clusters around the fire, talking and laughing among themselves. They threw glances at Clara, some curious, some contemptuous, all measuring, waiting to see how long she'd last. Wade Hollister, the trail boss, ate his meal standing up near his horse. When he finished, he scraped the plate clean and handed it back to Clara without a word. His eyes said everything his mouth didn't. Prove yourself or get out. Clara washed the dishes in water heated over the fire until her hands turned red. By the time she and Vivian climbed into their wagon to sleep, every muscle in her body ached. "You all right?" Vivian whispered in the darkness. "Yes." "You're lying." Clara didn't answer. She lay on the thin bedroll, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down, men snoring, horses shifting, the crackle of dying fires. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. 3 months of this. Maybe 4. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about how many days that actually was. By the end of the first week, the pattern was set. Clara woke before dawn, built the fire, started coffee, cooked breakfast for 40 men. She served it while they complained about the portions, the taste, the temperature. Then she packed up the wagon, drove it all day behind the herd eating dust, and set up camp again when they stopped at night. Dinner, dishes, sleep, repeat. The work was relentless. Her back never stopped hurting. Her hands developed blisters that popped and bled and formed new blisters underneath. She lost weight she didn't have to lose, and the men never let up. "Hey, cook, this stew got any meat in it, or is it just dirty water?" "Where's the salt? You forget how to season food?" "My grandmother cooks better than this, and she's been dead 10 years. Clara learned to tune it out, learned to focus on the work, on keeping her hands busy, on getting through one meal at a time. But there was one cowboy who wouldn't let her tune him out. His name was Boone Cutter, and he was the kind of man who found pleasure in making other people miserable. He was big, 6.5 feet, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and hands like ham hocks. He wore his cruelty openly, like some men wore jewelry. When he smiled, it was the smile of a wolf looking at something small and injured. He started small, knocking over her supply crates, spilling coffee grounds in the dirt, complaining loudly about everything she cooked. Clara ignored him. That made him escalate. One night, 2 weeks into the drive, he sat by the fire making comments just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know why they hired a woman cook," he said to the cowboy next to him. "Because no man would work this cheap, and no man this incompetent could get hired anywhere else." A few men laughed nervously. Most stayed quiet. Clara kept washing dishes. "I heard she got run out of her last town," Boone continued. "Something about spreading her legs for the wrong man. That true, cook?" Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. "I asked you a question," Boone said. "Leave her alone, Boone," someone muttered. "Why? She's getting paid same as us. She can handle some conversation." Clara lifted a pot from the water, dried it carefully, set it aside. Her heart was hammering, but her hand stayed steady. "What's the matter?" Boone's voice took on a mocking tone. "Cat got your tongue? Or did you leave it back with all those men you—" "Enough!" Wade Hollister's voice cut through the camp like a blade. "Shut your mouth and get some sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow." Boone scowled but subsided. He stood up, stretched, and walked past Clara close enough that his leg brushed against her shoulder. "This ain't over," he said quietly. Clara waited until he was gone before she allowed herself to breathe. Vivian appeared at her elbow. "You should tell Mr. Hollister." "No." "Clara, I handle my own problems." Clara dried her hands on her apron. "If I go running to the boss every time someone's mean to me, I'll never earn their respect. I'll just prove I can't do this." "You don't have to prove anything to these men." "Yes, I do." Clara looked at her mother. "You know I do." Vivian sighed, but didn't argue. She knew her daughter too well. The next day brought rain. It started as a drizzle around noon and turned into a downpour by evening. The cattle got spooked and scattered. The cowboys spent hours rounding them up, coming back to camp wet, exhausted, and furious. Clara had kept the fire going despite the rain, built a shelter over it with canvas and determination. Hot coffee and beef stew waited when the men rode in. They ate in silence, too tired to complain. Even Boone just took his food and sat hunched under a wagon, shoveling it in mechanically. One of the younger cowboys, a kid maybe 19 with red hair and freckles, approached Clara after he'd finished eating. "That was good, ma'am," he said quietly. "Thank you." Clara looked up, surprised. "You're welcome." "I'm Danny. Danny Reeves." He shifted awkwardly. "I just wanted to say,
Not all of us think you're doing a bad job. Some of these men, they'd complain if you served them steak and champagne. I appreciate that.
Danny nodded and walked away quickly, like he was afraid someone might have seen him being kind. But Clara noticed. She tucked that small moment of decency away like a treasure. The third week, one of the supply wagons broke an axle crossing a rocky stream bed. The wagon tipped sideways, spilling flour, beans, and salt pork into the water. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, cursed creatively while trying to salvage what he could. Clara waded into the stream without being asked. She and Vivian spent 2 hours pulling supplies out of the current, saving what was dry, spreading the rest out to air. Half their flour was ruined, a third of their beans. The bacon was waterlogged. "We're going to run short on rations," Pete told Wade Hollister that night. "If we don't ration careful, we won't make it to the end." Hollister looked at Clara. "Can you stretch what we've got?" "I can try." "You'll have to do better than try." Clara met his eyes. "I'll make it work." And she did. She cut portions without making it obvious, used wild onions and prairie turnips she foraged to bulk up stews, made the coffee weaker, stretched the bacon by rendering the fat and using it to flavor beans. The men grumbled, but they didn't starve. Wade Hollister noticed. He didn't say anything, but Clara saw the way he watched her after that. The calculation in his eyes shifting towards something that might have been respect. It was a small victory. She held on to it. The fourth week brought the real test. They were camped near a river. The herd settled for the night. Clara was preparing dinner when Boone appeared at the cook wagon. He was alone. The rest of the men were out with the cattle. "Need something?" Clara asked without looking at him. "Yeah. I need you to understand something." Boone leaned against the wagon. "This little game you're playing, pretending you belong out here, it's getting old." "I'm not playing a game." "Sure you are. You're playing at being tough, playing at being one of the crew." He stepped closer. "But we both know what you really are." Clara set down the knife she'd been using to cut potatoes. "And what's that?" "A whore trying to buy respectability with hard work." The word landed like a physical blow. Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. She turned to face him fully. Boone was smiling that wolf smile. "Nothing to say? No denial? I don't owe you explanations. You don't owe me anything, but you should know, everyone sees through you. Everyone knows why a woman like you would sign onto a cattle drive, trying to escape your past, trying to pretend you're something you're not. Get away from my wagon. Or what?" Boone took another step forward. "You going to tell the boss? Cry to your mama? What exactly are you going to do?" Clara reached behind her and grabbed the pot of stew simmering over the fire. It was cast iron, heavy, filled with boiling liquid. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," she said quietly. Boone laughed. "You think you scare me?" "No, but you should be scared anyway." He reached out to grab her arm. Clara swung the pot. Boiling stew hit Boone square in the face. He screamed, a high, terrible sound, and fell backward, hands clutching at his scalded skin. Clara stood over him, pot still in hand, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. The entire camp had frozen. Cowboys who'd been tending horses stopped mid-motion. Men at the fire turned to stare. Even the cattle seemed to go quiet. Boone writhed on the ground, still screaming. His face was bright red, already blistering. Wade Hollister appeared from somewhere, took in the scene with one sweeping glance. "What happened?" he demanded. "He grabbed me," Clara said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "I defended myself." "She attacked me!" Boone's words came out garbled with pain. "That crazy bitch attacked me." "You put your hands on her first?" Hollister asked. I was just talking." "Did you touch her?" Boone hesitated. "I might have. Yes or no?" "Yes, but then you got what you deserved." Hollister turned to two nearby cowboys. "Get him to the river. Cool that burn before it gets infected. And someone find the medicine kit." "She can't just," Boone started. "She already did." Hollister's voice was flat. "You want to press this further? Because I'll tell you right now, a man who puts hands on a woman in my camp doesn't get sympathy. He gets fired. Choose." Boone stared at him with hatred radiating from every pore. Then he let the other cowboys help him to his feet and half carry him toward the river. The camp slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Work continued. But everyone was acutely aware of the woman standing by the cook wagon, still holding that cast iron pot. Clara set it down carefully. Her hands were shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Vivian appeared beside her. "Are you all right?" "I don't know. You did what you had to do." "Did I?" Clara looked at her hands. They were red from the heat of the pot. "I could have really hurt him." "He was trying to hurt you first." "I know, but—" Clara's voice broke. "I've never done anything like that before. I've never fought back, never stood up, and now—" "Now they know you're not to be trifled with," Vivian finished. "That's not a bad thing, Clara." But Clara wasn't sure. She'd spent her whole life making herself small, invisible, safe. And in one moment of rage and fear, she'd done the opposite. She'd made herself seen. The question was what that would cost her. That night, Danny Reeves approached her again. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say that was real brave what you did." Clara looked up from the dishes she was washing. "I'm not sure brave is the right word." "It is. Boone's been pushing folks around since this drive started. Someone needed to show him he couldn't get away with it." Danny glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "A lot of the boys are glad you did it. They won't say it out loud, but they are." "And the ones who aren't glad?" Danny shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there's always going to be some who think a woman shouldn't—" He stopped. "But they're wrong. You're doing the job. That's what matters." After he left, Clara sat alone by the dying fire. She thought about Elias back at the ranch, wondered if he'd be proud of what she'd done or horrified, wondered if he was thinking about her at all. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The next morning, Wade Hollister pulled Clara aside before the drive started. "We need to talk," he said. Clara's stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to fire her. "Yes, sir. What you did yesterday, throwing hot food at a man, that could have been real bad." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." Hollister held up a hand. "You defended yourself against a man who had no business putting hands on you. Far as I'm concerned, you did exactly what you should have done." Clara stared at him. "I'm not fired?" "Fired? Hell no. You're the best cook I've had in 10 years. You think I'm going to fire you because you put Boone in his place?" He almost smiled. "That man's had it coming since the day I hired him." But he said, "Boone says a lot of things. Most of them are lies." Hollister looked at her seriously. "You signed on to cook, and you've done that. But you also signed on knowing this would be hard, knowing the men would test you. So far you've passed every test. Don't stop now." "I won't." "Good." He started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, most of these cowboys respect strength. You showed them you've got it. They won't forget that." Clara watched him go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Pride, maybe, or something close to it. The miles rolled by. They crossed rivers, navigated canyons, pushed through storms. The cattle grew thinner. The men grew harder. And Clara kept cooking, kept working, kept surviving. Boone avoided her after the stew incident. His face healed slowly, leaving pink scars that made him even uglier than before. He shot her looks of pure hatred whenever their paths crossed, but he never got close again. Other men started treating her differently. Not all of them. Some still ignored her, still complained about her cooking. But there was a shift, a grudging acknowledgement that she'd earned her place. Danny Reeves became something like a friend. He'd sit by the fire after dinner sometimes and talk about his family back in Kansas. His younger sister who wanted to be a teacher, his father who died in the war. "What about you?" he asked one night. "You got family besides your mother?" Clara thought about Elias, about Black Hollow Ranch, about the life she'd left behind. "Maybe," she said. "I'm not sure yet." Danny seemed to understand that answer. He didn't push. At the 6-week mark, they hit the worst storm Clara had ever seen. It came out of nowhere. One minute the sky was clear, the next it was black as midnight. Lightning split the darkness. Thunder shook the ground. Rain fell so hard it hurt. The cattle panicked immediately. 3,000 head of longhorns stampeding in the dark, with only 40 men trying to stop them. "Stay with the wagon!" Hollister shouted at Clara before galloping off into the chaos. Clara and Vivian huddled under the canvas cover, listening to the sounds of disaster. Men shouting, cattle bellowing, the thunder of hooves. Then the wind hit. It lifted the wagon cover clean off, ripping the canvas away like tissue paper. Rain poured in. Supplies started sliding toward the edge. "Help me!" Clara grabbed a sack of flour before it could fall. Vivian seized another bag. They worked in darkness, trying to save what they could, getting soaked to the bone. Lightning provided brief, strobing glimpses of the camp in ruins. When dawn finally came, the storm had passed, but the damage was obvious. 2 wagons overturned. Half the horses scattered. The cattle spread across 5 miles of prairie. And 3 men injured, one with a broken arm, 2 trampled but alive. Clara and Vivian spent that day drying out supplies and rationing what little food remained undamaged. They were down to almost nothing now. "We've got maybe a week of food left," Clara told Hollister, "if we stretch it thin." "We're 3 weeks from the railroad," he said grimly. "We'll have to hunt, forage, make do." "We will." And they did. The men hunted rabbits, prairie chickens, anything that moved. Clara learned to make soup from bones, bread from the last handfuls of flour mixed with water and hope. She foraged wild plants she'd never seen before, taking risks on things that might be edible. Twice men got sick from eating something that didn't agree with them, but nobody starved. At the 8-week mark, Clara realized she'd changed. She could feel it in how she moved, no longer hunched, no longer trying to disappear. She walked upright now, met people's eyes, spoke up when she needed to. The scared woman who'd arrived at Black Hollow Ranch didn't exist anymore. This woman, this tired, scarred, determined woman, she was someone different, someone Clara was still getting to know. One night, she caught her reflection in a pot of water. Her face was leaner, browned by sun and wind. Her hands were rough, calloused, strong. Her eyes looked older. She looked like someone who could survive anything. "You all right?" Vivian asked, appearing beside her. "Yeah." Clara set the pot down. "Just thinking." About whether Elias will recognize me when we get back." Vivian smiled. "He'll recognize you. The question is whether you'll recognize yourself." Clara thought about that as she prepared dinner. Thought about the woman she'd been, silent, ashamed, afraid. And the woman she was becoming, someone who threw boiling stew at men who threatened her. Someone who survived storms and stampedes. Someone who kept 40 cowboys fed on nothing but determination and scraps. She wondered if Elias would like this new version of her. She wondered if she liked it herself. At the 10-week mark, they lost a man. His name was Cooper. He was thrown from his horse during a river crossing and hit his head on a rock. By the time they pulled him out, he was gone. They buried him on a hill overlooking the prairie, marked the grave with stones, and moved on. That night, the camp was quieter than usual. Men sat around the fire, not talking, just staring into the flames. Clara brought coffee to each of them without being asked. Didn't try to make conversation, just offered the small comfort of something hot to drink. When she got to Danny Reeves, he looked up at her with red eyes. "Cooper was my friend," he said. "I know. We grew up together, signed onto this drive together. He was going to use his pay to buy his girl a ring." Clara sat down beside him. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault." "I know, but I'm still sorry." They sat in silence for a while. Then Danny said, "You ever lose someone?" Clara thought about her father, about Thomas, the man who'd promised to marry her and then abandoned her, about all the versions of herself she'd left behind. "Yes," she said, "I have." "Does it get easier?" "No, you just get stronger." Danny nodded slowly. "I hope you're right." So did Clara. At the 12-week mark, they finally saw it, Dodge City, rising out of the prairie like a miracle. The railroad depot, the cattle pens, the buildings, people, civilization. A cheer went up from the cowboys. Even the cattle seemed to sense that the journey was over, pushing forward with renewed energy. They drove the herd into the holding pens late that afternoon. Buyers waited with money. Hollister negotiated prices while his men got the cattle settled. Clara and Vivian stayed with the wagon, watching it all happen. "We made it," Vivian said quietly. "Yeah." Clara couldn't quite believe it. "We did." That evening, after the cattle were sold and the money distributed, Wade Hollister found Clara. He handed her an envelope. "Your pay, every dollar you earned." Clara opened it, counted the bills. $150. It felt like a fortune. It felt like nothing at all. "You did good work," Hollister said. "Better than good. If I'm running another drive next year, I want you on it.
I appreciate that.
I mean it. You're tough as any man I've worked with, tougher than most. He tipped his hat. Safe travels back to wherever you're headed. After he left, Clara just stood there holding the envelope. 3 months, 12 weeks, 84 days. She'd survived stampedes, storms, starvation, and men who wanted to break her. She'd cooked over 1,000 meals, driven hundreds of miles, proven to herself and everyone else that she was stronger than they thought. And now it was over. Danny Reeves found her before she left. I wanted to say goodbye, he said. And thank you. For what? For showing me that being tough doesn't mean being cruel, that you can be strong and still be kind. He smiled. I'm going to remember that. Take care of yourself, Danny. You too, ma'am. Claire and Vivian left Dodge City the next morning. They bought a train ticket back to Black Hollow with part of Clara's earnings. Sat in the third-class car with farmers and laborers and people who smelled like hard work. Clara watched the prairie roll by outside the window. Thought about everything that had happened, everything she'd learned, everything she'd become. And she thought about Elias. Wondered if the ranch was still standing. Wondered if he'd survived the past 3 months any better than she had. Wondered if the man who'd given her a chance was still waiting. Or if she'd taken too long to come home. The train rattled on through the night, carrying her back toward the only place that had ever felt like it might be worth fighting for. Carrying her back toward a future that was still uncertain. But for the first time in her life, Clara wasn't afraid of uncertainty. She was ready for it. The ranch looked smaller than Clara remembered, or maybe she'd just gotten used to endless horizons. 3 months of prairie and sky had changed her sense of scale. Everything in Black Hollow felt compressed now, like the world had shrunk while she was gone. The train had dropped them at the depot just after dawn. Clara and Vivian hired a wagon from the livery, the same one they'd arrived in months ago, looking like refugees. Now Clara sat on that bench with $150 in her pocket and calluses on her hands that wouldn't fade. The driver, an old man named Pete, who'd probably been ancient when the town was founded, kept glancing at her sideways. "You're the one who went on that cattle drive," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Heard about that. Heard you made it the whole way."
I did, Pete grunted. Never thought you would. No offense, ma'am, but most folks in town figured you'd be back in a week, crying about how hard it was. Most folks in town don't know me. Reckon that's true. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, there's been talk. Some people saying maybe they were wrong about you. Not everyone, mind, but some.
Clara didn't respond. She wasn't interested in whether Black Hollow had decided to forgive her for sins she'd never committed. She was interested in getting back to the ranch, finding Elias, and figuring out if 3 months of hell had been enough to save what mattered. They turned onto the road leading to Mercerland just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. The light hit everything at an angle, throwing long shadows across the valley. And that's when Clara saw the smoke, not the thin white smoke of a cooking fire. Thick, dark smoke rising in columns from somewhere beyond the next hill. "What's that?" Vivian asked, voice tight. Pete squinted. "Don't know, but it ain't good." Clara's heart started hammering. "Oh, can this wagon go faster?" "Not much, but I'll try." Pete snapped the reins. The horses picked up their pace from a walk to a reluctant trot. The smoke got thicker as they approached. Clara could smell it now, wood and grass and something else. Something that made her throat close up. They crested the hill, and Clara saw it. Fire. A wall of it stretching across the northern pasture, racing toward the ranch buildings on a wind that seemed determined to destroy everything in its path. And in front of that fire, tiny figures moved frantically, digging, hauling water, fighting a battle they were clearly losing. "Stop the wagon," Clara said. "What?" "Stop the wagon!" Pete pulled back on the reins. The wagon lurched to a halt. Clara was already climbing down, Vivian right behind her. "You can't go down there," Pete called. "That fire's going to jump the fire break any minute. It'll kill you." Clara didn't answer. She was running. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. The smoke got in her eyes and made them water. But she kept running, down the hill, across the lower pasture, toward the figures who were trying to hold back disaster with nothing but shovels and desperation. She got close enough to recognize Elias. He was stripped to the waist, covered in soot and sweat, digging a trench alongside two other men. His face was set in grim concentration, every muscle straining as he threw dirt onto the advancing flames. "Elias!" Clara shouted. He didn't hear her. The fire was too loud, a roaring, crackling beast that drowned out everything else. She ran closer, grabbed his shoulder. He spun around, shovel raised like a weapon. Then his eyes went wide. "Clara? What do you need?" she asked. No greeting, no explanation, just the question that mattered. Elias stared at her like she was a ghost. "What are you? You shouldn't be here." "What do you need?" He seemed to shake himself. "Water. We need water on the east side, or the fire's going to reach the barn." "Where are the buckets?" "By the well." But Clara, she was already gone, running toward the ranch house. Vivian appeared beside her, breathing hard. "The well," Clara gasped. "We need buckets." They found 6 buckets stacked near the well. Clara grabbed 3, Vivian took the rest. They filled them, hauled them toward the fire break, dumped them on flames that laughed at the tiny offering of water. Then they ran back and did it again, and again, and again. Clara lost track of time. The world narrowed to a simple loop: fill, carry, dump, return. Her arms felt like they were going to fall off. Her back screamed. The smoke made her cough so hard she thought she might vomit. But she didn't stop. More people arrived. Clara recognized some of them, neighbors from surrounding ranches. They brought shovels, blankets soaked in water, more buckets. The line of defenders grew from 5 to 10 to 15. Someone handed Clara a wet cloth. "Tie it over your face." She did. It helped with the smoke, but made breathing harder. The fire kept coming. Just when Clara thought they were going to lose, when the flames were 10 feet from the barn and closing fast, the wind shifted. It was a small shift, maybe just a few degrees, but it was enough to push the fire sideways instead of forward, sending it away from the buildings and toward open ground where there was nothing to burn. The defenders pressed the advantage. They attacked the weakened flank with renewed energy, beating down flames, smothering embers, creating a gap the fire couldn't cross. And slowly, so slowly, Clara almost didn't believe it was happening, they started winning. By noon, the fire was out. What remained was a blackened scar across the northern pasture, smoking ash, dead grass. The smell of destruction hanging in the air like a curse. Clara stood in the middle of it all, shaking with exhaustion, and looked at what they'd saved. The ranch house stood untouched. So did the barn. The cattle were safe in the southern pasture. They'd lost some fencing and a lot of grassland, but the heart of the ranch survived. It survived. Elias appeared beside her. He looked like he'd been through a war. Soot streaked his face. Burns marked his arms. His eyes were bloodshot from smoke. "You came back," he said hoarsely. "Of course I came back. The fire. If you'd been an hour later." But I wasn't. Clara turned to face him fully. "Is the debt paid?" Elias's expression went dark. "No." "How much do you still owe?" $300. Clara's heart sank. She'd earned $150. It wasn't enough. After 3 months of hell, it still wasn't enough. "When's it due?" she asked. 3 days. 3 days. After everything they'd been through, they had 72 hours to find money that didn't exist. Clara looked down at her hands. They were black with soot, bleeding from blisters that had torn open during the firefighting. She'd survived a cattle drive, crossed half the territory, earned every dollar through pain and fear and endless work, and it still wasn't enough. "No," she said quietly. Elias frowned. "What?" "No." Clara's voice got louder. "I didn't survive 12 weeks of hell to come back and lose anyway. I didn't throw boiling stew at a man twice my size, didn't cook 1,000 meals in the dirt, didn't drive through storms and stampedes just to watch them take this ranch." "Clara, where's the banker?" "What?" "Vernon Pritchard. Where does he work?" "The bank in town, but—" "Good." Clara started walking toward the wagon where Pete still waited, looking shell-shocked. "I'm going to talk to him." Elias caught up to her. "You can't just walk into the bank and watch me." "Clara, these people hate you. They're not going to help. I don't need them to help me." Clara's jaw was set. "I just need them to face me." She climbed into the wagon. Vivian was already there, looking at her daughter with something that might have been pride or might have been concern. hard to tell which. Elias grabbed the side of the wagon. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm planning to make Vernon Pritchard look me in the eye while he destroys an honest man's life, and then I'm planning to make everyone in this town look at what they've done." She met Elias's gaze. "You coming or not?" Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the men who'd helped fight the fire. "Anyone got a shirt I can borrow?" Someone tossed him a spare. Elias pulled it on, climbed into the wagon beside Clara, and nodded to Pete. "Take us to town." Pete looked at the three of them, a soot-covered rancher, a determined woman with burns on her hands, and a mother who'd seen too much to be scared of anything anymore. "This is going to get ugly," Pete said. "Probably," Clara agreed. "Good." Pete grinned, showing 3 remaining teeth. "I always liked a good show." He snapped the reins and the wagon rolled toward Black Hollow. The bank was a 2-story brick building on Main Street, the nicest structure in town. Vernon Pritchard had made sure of that. While everyone else scraped by in wooden buildings that leaked when it rained, the bank stood solid and permanent, a monument to the power of money. Clara walked through the front door without hesitation. The interior was all dark wood and brass fittings, designed to intimidate. 2 tellers worked behind a long counter. A few customers waited on benches. Everyone stopped and stared when Clara entered. She ignored them, walked straight to the counter where a nervous-looking young man stood. "I need to see Vernon Pritchard," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No?" "Then I'm afraid—" "Tell him Clara Hale is here to discuss Elias Mercer's loan. Tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to start telling everyone in this bank exactly how he's been conducting business." The young teller's eyes went wide. He disappeared through a door behind the counter. Less than a minute later, Vernon Pritchard emerged. He was a thin man in his 50s, with gray hair slicked back and a mustache that probably took him an hour to wax every morning. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself like someone who'd never had to worry about where his next meal was coming from. His eyes narrowed when he saw Clara. "Miss Hale, I wasn't expecting— I need to talk to you about Elias Mercer's debt. That's a private matter between Mr. Mercer and this bank." "Nothing's private when you've been using that debt as a weapon," Clara said loudly enough that everyone in the bank could hear. "You called in his loan early because he gave my mother and me a place to stay. Because he didn't bow to this town's cruelty." Pritchard's face flushed. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Clara stepped closer. "Elias Mercer has been a customer of this bank for 8 years. He's never missed a payment, never been late. The only thing that changed was he hired 2 women this town had already decided were beneath them. This bank makes decisions based on financial. This bank makes decisions based on spite." Clara pulled the envelope from her pocket, the one containing her cattle drive earnings. "I have $150 here, earned over 3 months of the hardest work I've ever done. It's not enough to cover the full debt, but it's something. The question is whether you're willing to accept it." Pritchard looked at the envelope like it was a snake. "The full amount is due in 3 days. I know when it's due. I'm asking if you'll accept a partial payment and extend the deadline. Give Elias time to earn the rest." "This bank doesn't operate on extensions and maybes, Miss Hale. We have policies—" "Your policies seem awfully flexible when it comes to calling in loans early," Clara said, "but suddenly rigid when it comes to helping an honest man survive. Funny how that works." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Clara could feel their attention like a physical weight. Pritchard's face had gone from flushed to pale. "I think you should leave." "Not until you answer my question. Will you accept this money and extend the deadline?" "No." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face the other people in the bank. "You all heard that. Vernon Pritchard would rather destroy a man's livelihood than show an ounce of mercy. Remember that the next time he talks about community values. Remember that the next time he stands in church pretending to care about his neighbors." "Get out!" Pritchard hissed. "Get out of my bank right now, or I'll have the sheriff remove you." "I'm going." Clara walked toward the door. Then she stopped and looked back. "But this isn't over. One way or another, Elias Mercer is going to keep his ranch. And when he does, everyone in this town will know exactly what kind of man you are." She walked out into the sunlight. Elias and Vivian were waiting by the wagon. One look at Clara's face told them how it had gone. "He said no," Elias said. It wasn't a question. He said no. Elias leaned back against the wagon, defeat written in every line of his body.
Then it's over. We're done. No. Clara's voice was hard. We're not done. Clara, there's no more time. No more options. There's always another option. She looked up and down Main Street. We just have to find it. Her eyes landed on the church at the north end of town, the white steeple rising above everything else, visible for miles. The place where Black Hollow's most respectable citizens gathered every Sunday to judge their neighbors. An idea formed. Reckless, probably stupid, but an idea nonetheless. I need to talk to the women, Clara said. What women?
The ones who run this town. The wives and mothers and daughters who decide what's acceptable and what's not.
Clara started walking toward the general store.
They're the ones who poisoned this town against us. Maybe they're the ones who can fix it.
They won't listen to you, Vivian warned. Maybe not, but I have to try.
Morrison's general store was crowded when Clara entered. At least a dozen women were there, examining fabric and comparing prices and gossiping the way people do in small towns where entertainment is scarce. The conversations died when Clara walked in. She recognized most of them. Sarah Brennan from the saloon, Helen Pritchard, the banker's wife, Margaret Cole, the rancher's wife who'd called Clara ruined months ago. They were all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Clara walked to the center of the store and turned to face them. I know what you think of me, she said. You think I'm ruined, shameful, corrupting. You've made that very clear. No one spoke. And maybe you're right, Clara continued. Maybe I did make mistakes. Maybe I trusted the wrong person and paid for it. But here's what I learned while I was gone. Mistakes don't make you worthless. They just make you human. We didn't come here for a sermon, Helen Pritchard said coldly. Good, because I'm not preaching, I'm asking. Clara looked at each of them in turn. Elias Mercer is going to lose his ranch in 3 days. Not because he failed at anything, not because he made bad decisions, but because your husband, she pointed at Helen, and people like him decided to punish him for showing kindness to strangers. That's not... It is exactly what happened, and everyone in this room knows it. Clara's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. I'm asking you to help. I've got $150. Elias needs $300 more. If even a few of you could spare something, anything, it might be enough to buy him more time. Margaret Cole laughed. It was not a kind sound. You're asking us to give money to help a man who harbored you, who brought shame onto this entire community. I'm asking you to help a good man who's done nothing wrong. He chose his path when he chose to help you. Then punish me, Clara said. I'm standing right here. Say whatever you want about me. Call me whatever names you need to call me. But don't destroy an innocent man's life because of it. You're not innocent, Sarah Brennan said. And neither is he, not anymore. He made his choice. Clara looked at them. These women in their clean dresses with their judgmental eyes. Women who'd probably never gone hungry, never been beaten, never had to choose between shame and survival. You're right, Clara said quietly. I'm not innocent. I fell in love with someone who lied to me. I trusted when I should have been more careful. And I've been paying for that mistake every day since. She pulled off her gloves, held up her hands so they could see the calluses, the scars, the burns from fighting the fire. These are from 3 months on a cattle drive, 3 months of working harder than most of the men in this town have ever worked, 3 months of being mocked and threatened and pushed to my limits. And you know what I learned? No one answered. I learned that I'm stronger than the people who tried to break me, stronger than the shame you tried to bury me under, stronger than every cruel word and hateful look. Clara's voice cracked but didn't break. And I learned that there are still good people in this world. People like Elias Mercer, who see someone struggling and help them anyway, even when it costs them everything. She put her gloves back on. So I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to be better than your worst instincts, just this once. Silence filled the store. Then Margaret Cole turned and walked out without a word. Sarah Brennan followed. One by one, the other women left until only Helen Pritchard remained. She looked at Clara with something that might have been pity. You really don't understand, Helen said. This isn't about you anymore. It's about what you represent, change, outsiders, people who don't follow the rules.
If we help Elias now, it tells everyone that the rules don't matter, that you can defy this community and face no consequences. The rules are wrong, Clara said. Maybe, but there are rules, and we're not ready to change them. Helen walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Foolish, but brave. I hope you find what you're looking for. Then she was gone too. Clara stood alone in the general store, feeling the weight of failure settle over her shoulders like a wet blanket. Jacob Morrison emerged from behind the counter. He'd been there the whole time, listening. That took guts, he said. Didn't do any good. Maybe not, but it needed saying. He was quiet for a moment. I was wrong about you, Miss Hale. When you first came to town, I judged you same as everyone else. But you proved me wrong. Thanks, Clara said without much feeling. If I had $300 lying around, I'd give it to you, but I don't. This store barely breaks even most months. I understand. Clara walked out into the fading afternoon light. Elias and Vivian were waiting. One look at her face told them everything. Let's go home, Elias said quietly. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Clara stared at the passing landscape, feeling hollowed out. She'd tried. She'd faced the people who hated her, asked for help, put aside her pride, and it hadn't mattered. They were still going to lose. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bunkhouse staring at the ceiling, listening to Vivian's breathing beside her. Her mother had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from the day. But Clara's mind wouldn't quiet. 3 days, 72 hours. Then the bank would take everything. She thought about Elias, probably lying awake in the ranch house with the same thoughts circling his head. Thought about the months she'd spent fighting to save this place, only to come up short in the end. Thought about the look on his face when she'd walked into the middle of the fire, the shock and relief and something else she couldn't quite name. Around midnight, Clara gave up on sleep. She got dressed quietly and walked outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt. The smell of smoke still lingered from the fire, mixing with the usual prairie scents. She walked toward the ranch house without really meaning to, just needed to move, to do something other than lie there drowning in failure. Light showed through the kitchen window. Clara hesitated, then knocked softly. Elias opened the door. He was fully dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. Come in. I'll make coffee. The kitchen was warm and familiar. Clara sat at the table while Elias worked the stove. They didn't talk, didn't need to. When the coffee was ready, Elias poured 2 cups and sat across from her. They drank in comfortable silence. Finally, Elias spoke. I'm sorry. Clara looked up. For what? For letting you risk everything on that cattle drive. For not finding another way. For... He stopped. For all of it. You didn't let me do anything. I chose to go. I should have stopped you. You couldn't have. Clara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, savoring the warmth. I needed to go. Needed to prove to myself that I could survive something hard. Did you? Yeah, I did. She met his eyes. I'm not the same person who left here 3 months ago. I noticed. Elias smiled slightly. You walk different now. Carry yourself different. Is that good or bad? It's good. You look... He searched for the word. Free. Like something that was weighing you down is gone. Clara thought about that. Maybe it is. I spent so long being ashamed of who I was, what I'd done. Let that shame make me small. But out on that trail, there wasn't room for shame, just survival. And somewhere along the way, I stopped apologizing for existing. You never should have had to apologize in the first place. No, but I did anyway. She took another sip of coffee. What about you? How bad were the past 3 months? Elias's expression darkened. Bad. The town tried starving me out. No one would trade with me. The bank kept pushing, demanding payment early. Then that fire yesterday. He shook his head. If you hadn't shown up when you did, I'd have lost everything in the flames instead of to Pritchard. Who helped fight the fire? I recognized some of the faces, but not all. Neighbors. People I thought had written me off. Elias looked surprised even saying it. Tom Henderson brought his sons. The widow Mackenzie sent her ranch hands.
Even old Ben Sutton rode over, and he's 80 if he's a day.
Why?
I think, Elias paused, I think watching the town turn cruel made some people realize they didn't like what Black Hollow was becoming. So they helped, quietly. Brought supplies when I needed them. Defended me when others spoke against me. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to save the ranch from fire, Clara said, but not enough to save it from the bank. No. They sat with that truth for a while. Then Elias reached across the table and took Clara's hand.
She looked down at their joined hands, startled. His palm was rough with calluses. So was hers. They matched. Whatever happens in 3 days, Elias said quietly, I want you to know something. What? Having you here, having you and your mother here, it's been the best thing that's happened to me in 10 years. Even if I lose the ranch, I won't regret giving you a chance. Clara's throat tightened. Elias? Let me finish. He squeezed her hand gently. You asked me once if I thought you were ruined. I said no, but I didn't tell you the whole truth. Which is? That you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. That watching you refuse to break, refuse to quit, even when the whole world was against you, it reminded me why I fell in love with this place, why I kept fighting when everything said I should give up. His voice was rough. You reminded me what courage looks like.
A tear slid down Clara's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I don't feel courageous, she whispered. You never do. That's what makes it courage. They sat there, hands linked across the table, while the night pressed against the windows and the future hung uncertain. And Clara realized something that should have terrified her, but didn't. She'd fallen in love with Elias Mercer. Somewhere between his quiet kindness and stubborn determination, between the way he defended her without expecting anything in return, and the way he looked at her like she mattered, she'd fallen completely. Elias, she said, yeah, when this is over, when we figure out what comes next, I'm not leaving, even if the bank takes the ranch, even if we have to start over somewhere else. I'm staying with you. Elias stared at her. Clara, I mean it. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw past the shame and the fear and all the broken pieces, and Her voice caught. I want to stay. Elias stood up, pulling her to her feet. His hands cupped her face gently. Then we'll figure it out together, he said. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss Thomas had given her years ago, demanding, taking, leaving her feeling used. This was different, gentle, careful, like Elias was afraid she might break. Clara kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into it, all the fear and hope and desperate love she'd been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking. We should get some sleep, Elias said. Tomorrow's going to be... A knock on the door interrupted him. They both froze. It was past 1 a.m. Nobody knocked at this hour unless something was wrong. Elias opened the door carefully. Margaret Cole stood on the porch, the rancher's wife who'd mocked Clara in the general store, who'd walked out when Clara asked for help, who'd called her corrupting and ruined and shameful. She stood there in a traveling cloak holding a leather bag. Mrs. Cole, Elias said, confused, what are you... I need to speak with Miss Hale, Margaret interrupted. Her voice was strained. May I come in? Elias stepped aside. Margaret entered, saw Clara, and stopped. For a long moment, the two women just looked at each other. Then Margaret set the bag on the table. There's $200 in there, she said. Donations? From women in town. Clara stared at the bag like it might explode. I don't understand. After you left the store today, I went home. Told my husband what you'd said, how you'd asked for help. Margaret's jaw was tight. He laughed, said you got what you deserved, and I realized I've been married to a cruel man for 20 years and never said a word about it. She opened the bag. Bundles of bills sat inside. So I went to other women, the ones who aren't married to cruel men, or the ones who are but hated as much as I do. I told them what was happening, told them we had a chance to do something right for once. Why? Clara whispered. Margaret looked at her. Because you were right. The rules are wrong, and I'm tired of pretending they're not. She pushed the bag toward Clara. It's not quite enough for the full debt, but combined with what you earned, it should be close.
Clara counted quickly. Combined with her 150, they'd have $350, 50 more than they needed. She looked up at Margaret with tears streaming down her face. Why did you change your mind? Because, Margaret's voice broke, because I have a daughter. She's 16, and last month I caught my husband slapping her for speaking out of turn. I've been teaching her the same cruel rules I learned, teaching her to be small and quiet and ashamed. And watching you stand up in that store today, I thought, what if she could be like that instead? Brave instead of broken. She wiped her eyes roughly. This doesn't make us friends, Miss Hale. I still don't like you, still don't approve of your choices. But you were right about Elias Mercer, and you were right that punishing him for being decent is wrong. She headed for the door. Do with the money what you will. Mrs. Cole, Clara called. Thank you. Margaret paused at the threshold. Don't thank me. Just keep being brave. Someone needs to show the rest of us how. Then she was gone, disappearing into the night. Clara and Elias stared at the bag of money on the table. Did that really just happen? Elias asked. Clara laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. I think so. We can pay the debt. We can pay the debt. They looked at each other. And then Elias was lifting Clara off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. They'd won. After everything, the cattle drive, the fire, the cruelty and shame and endless fighting, they'd actually won. When Elias set her down, Clara grabbed his face and kissed him hard, poured every ounce of relief and love and gratitude into it. We did it, she whispered against his lips. You did it, Elias corrected. You saved this ranch, Clara. Not me. We saved it, together. They held each other in the kitchen while the coffee went cold and the stars wheeled overhead. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The morning Elias walked into Vernon Pritchard's bank to pay off the debt, half of Black Hollow found reasons to be on Main Street. Clara stood beside him, wearing the cleanest dress she owned, which wasn't saying much after 3 months on the trail. Vivian waited with the wagon, watching from across the street. The leather bag with $350 sat heavy in Elias's hands. Word had spread overnight. Margaret Cole's midnight visit hadn't stayed secret long. By dawn, everyone knew that the women of Black Hollow had defied their husbands and given money to save a man the town had tried to destroy. The scandal was delicious. People were going to be talking about it for years. Clara could feel their eyes on her as she and Elias approached the bank. Some looks were hostile, others curious. A few, and this surprised her, held something that might have been respect. You ready for this? Elias asked quietly. I faced worse than Vernon Pritchard. Yeah, you have. They walked through the bank doors together. Pritchard was waiting behind his desk in the back office. He stood when they entered, his expression carefully neutral. But Clara saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. He knew he'd lost. Mr. Mercer, Pritchard said. Miss Hale, I understand you've come to settle your account. That's right. Elias set the bag on the desk. $300. Pays off the loan in full, plus the interest you added when you called it in early. Pritchard looked at the bag like it was a dead animal. I'll need to count it. Count away. The banker opened the bag and began removing bills, arranging them in neat stacks on his desk. His movements were precise, mechanical. He counted twice, then a third time. Finally, he looked up. This is $350. The extra $50 is for future interest, Elias said, in case you get any ideas about calling in another loan I don't have. Pritchard's face flushed. Mr. Mercer, I assure you this bank operates with complete integrity. Save it. Elias's voice was hard. We both know why you called in that loan early. We both know this was never about business. So let's not pretend otherwise. The banker's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might argue. Then he pulled out a ledger book and began writing. I'll prepare the documentation showing the loan is paid in full, he said stiffly. You should receive it within the week. I'll wait. Pritchard looked up. I beg your pardon? I said I'll wait, right here, until you prepare that documentation and I can walk out of here with proof that I don't owe this bank a single cent. That could take hours. Then it takes hours. Elias sat down in the chair across from Pritchard's desk. I've got time. Clara bit back a smile. She sat beside Elias. Pritchard looked between them, clearly torn between his desire to throw them out and his knowledge that legally he had no grounds to refuse. Finally, with a barely suppressed snarl, he pulled out forms and began filling them out. It took 2 hours.
2 hours of Pritchard writing and stamping and signing documents while Elias and Clara sat in silence. 2 hours of the banker's humiliation playing out in the rigid set of his shoulders and the tight movements of his pen. When he finally slid the completed paperwork across the desk, his hand shook slightly. "Your loan is satisfied," he said. "The ranch is yours, free and clear." Elias read through every page carefully. Clara watched him, saw the moment the reality sank in. They'd won, actually genuinely won. "Thank you," Elias said, gathering the papers. His voice held no warmth. They stood to leave. At the door, Clara paused and looked back at Pritchard. He sat slumped behind his desk, looking older than he had 2 hours ago. "I want you to know something," she said. Pritchard didn't respond. "You tried to break us. You and everyone like you in this town. You used shame as a weapon, turned neighbors against each other, punished kindness." Clara's voice was steady. "But you failed. We're still standing, and we're going to keep standing, no matter what you do." "Are you quite finished?" Pritchard asked coldly. "Almost," Clara smiled. "I just wanted to make sure you understood. The world is changing, Mr. Pritchard. People like you, people who profit from cruelty, your time is running out. Might want to think about that." She walked out before he could respond. Outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted into whispers. Clara ignored them all. She climbed into the wagon beside Vivian while Elias took the reins. As they rolled down Main Street, heading home, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, she wasn't afraid of these people. Wasn't ashamed. Wasn't small. She was free. The ranch felt different after that. Maybe it was just knowing they actually owned it now, free and clear. Or maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the repaired fences, the sound of cattle moving through healthy pastures, the smell of fresh paint on the barn Elias had finally gotten around to fixing. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the absence of fear. Clara threw herself into work with renewed energy. She and Elias spent long days repairing the damage from the fire, replanting grass in the burned pastures, rebuilding what had been lost. Vivian cooked and mended and kept the house running. They worked as a team. No longer employer and employees, something closer to family. Neighbors started coming around more openly now. Tom Henderson and his sons helped rebuild the north fence line. The widow Mackenzie sent over preserves and fresh bread. Even old Ben Sutton rode over one afternoon just to sit on the porch and share tobacco with Elias. "Town's changing," Ben said, packing his pipe. "Folks are starting to see that maybe the old ways weren't working so well." "Because of what happened with the bank?" Elias asked. "Partly, but mostly because of her." Ben nodded toward where Clara was working in the garden. "She showed people what real strength looks like, not the kind that comes from tearing others down, the kind that comes from refusing to be torn down yourself." Elias watched Clara pulling weeds, her movements efficient and sure. "She's something, isn't she?" "That she is." Ben lit his pipe, puffed contemplatively. "You planning to marry her?" The question caught Elias off guard. We haven't talked about, boy, I may be old, but I'm not blind, the way you two look at each other." Ben chuckled. "If you don't marry her, you're a damned fool." Elias didn't argue. That evening, after dinner, Clara and Elias walked out to check on the cattle in the eastern pasture. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Clara of the fires she'd cooked over during the cattle drive. "I've been thinking," Elias said as they walked. About what comes next. The ranch is secure now, but it's still just scraping by. We need to expand, buy more cattle, maybe hire a hand or two. That takes money." "I know, but I was thinking, what if we did another cattle drive next year? A bigger one. Use the profits to really build this place up." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You want me to go on another drive?" "Not you. Us." Elias stopped walking, turned to face her. "I'd go this time. Hire out as a drover. We could use the money to—" "No." The word came out sharper than Clara intended. Elias frowned. "Why not?"
Because I just got you back. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. I spent 3 months wondering if I'd ever see you again, wondering if the ranch would still be here, if you'd still want me when I came back. I'm not going through that again. Clara, and you're not going either. Her voice softened. We'll find another way to expand. Something that doesn't mean one of us disappearing for months at a time. Elias studied her face. Then he smiled slightly. All right. We'll find another way. Promise? I promise. They continued walking, their shoulders brushing occasionally. The cattle grazed peacefully in the fading light. There's something else I've been thinking about, Elias said. What's that? He stopped again, reached into his pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. Clara's heart started beating faster. Elias unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a gold ring. It was simple, unadorned except for a small engraving on the inside. This was my mother's, he said quietly. She wore it for 40 years, left it to me when she died, told me to give it to someone worthy. Clara couldn't speak. I know we haven't known each other that long, and I know the circumstances haven't exactly been romantic, but Clara, he took her hand. You're the strongest person I've ever met, the kindest, the most stubborn. He smiled. I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Don't want to imagine it. Tears were running down Clara's face. So I'm asking, Elias continued, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, not just in running this ranch, but in everything? Clara tried to answer, but her throat was too tight. She nodded instead, frantically, while tears kept coming. Elias slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world narrowed to just the two of them standing in a pasture while the sun set and the cattle grazed and everything finally felt right. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. I love you, Clara whispered. I should have said it before, but I was scared. I know. I love you too. They held each other while the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. When? Clara asked eventually. When what? When should we get married? Elias laughed. I hadn't thought that far ahead. When do you want to? Clara considered. Soon. I don't want a big ceremony or a fancy dress or any of that. Just something small, real. That sounds perfect. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, the ring warm on Clara's finger. Vivian took one look at them when they entered the house and burst into tears. Finally, she said, hugging her daughter tight, I was wondering when you two would figure it out. You knew? Clara asked. Of course I knew. A mother always knows. Vivian pulled back, wiping her eyes. When's the wedding? Soon, Clara said. We were thinking something small. Absolutely not. Vivian's expression turned determined. My daughter is getting married and it's going to be done properly. Not some rushed affair. A real wedding. Mama, I'm not asking, Clara. You've spent your whole life making yourself small, accepting less than you deserve. Not this time. This time, you're going to stand up in front of everyone and claim your happiness. Clara looked at Elias helplessly. He shrugged. I learned a long time ago not to argue with your mother. So they started planning a wedding. Word spread through Black Hollow within days. The reactions were mixed. Some people were scandalized, the ruined woman marrying the rancher who'd defended her. Others were quietly pleased. A few didn't care one way or another. But Margaret Cole, surprisingly, became an unexpected ally. She appeared at the ranch a week after the engagement with fabric samples and a determined expression. I'm helping with the wedding, she announced. Clara stared at her. You are? Don't look so shocked. I told you I have a daughter. She needs to see that women can support each other instead of tearing each other down. Margaret spread the fabric samples on the table. Now, for your dress, I was thinking something simple but elegant. Mrs. Cole, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Margaret's voice softened. Let me do this, please. So Clara let her. Over the next few weeks, Margaret became a regular visitor. She brought fabric, patterns, advice. She enlisted other women to help, some of the same ones who'd contributed money to save the ranch. Slowly, a network of support formed. Women who were tired of Black Hollow's cruelty. Women who saw in Clara's story a chance to imagine something different for themselves and their daughters. Not everyone joined. Helen Pritchard made it clear she wanted nothing to do with the wedding. Sarah Brennan from the saloon called it a disgrace. But enough women came forward that Clara found herself surrounded by help she'd never expected. The wedding was planned for late October on Tom Henderson's ranch. He had a large barn that could accommodate guests, and his wife Emma insisted on hosting. "You helped save Elias's ranch," Emma said when Clara tried to protest. "This is how we say thank you." As the date approached, Clara felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. She'd been engaged before, to Thomas, back in Missouri. That engagement had ended in shame and heartbreak. Part of her couldn't quite believe this time would be different. "You're doing it again," Vivian said one evening, watching Clara stare at the wedding dress Margaret had made. "Doing what?" "Waiting for disaster, expecting everything to fall apart." Clara touched the dress gently. It was beautiful, simple cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Nothing fancy, but perfect for her. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered. "Ready for what?" "For happiness. What if I don't know how to be someone's wife? What if—" "Clara." Vivian turned her daughter to face her. "You survived things that would have broken most people. You crossed half the territory with 40 cowboys who wanted you to fail. You saved a ranch from foreclosure and a fire. You faced down the entire town of Black Hollow and won. So if you can do all that, you can handle being Elias Mercer's wife." Vivian smiled. "Besides, he's not asking you to be perfect. He's asking you to be yourself. That's all." Clara hugged her mother tight. "When did you get so wise?" "About the same time you got so brave." The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bunkhouse listening to Vivian's soft snoring, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Tomorrow she'd stand in front of the people of Black Hollow and marry Elias. Tomorrow her life would change again. She wondered if Thomas ever thought about her, if he regretted abandoning her, if he knew she'd survived his betrayal and built something better. Probably not. Men like Thomas rarely looked back. But it didn't matter anymore. That pain belonged to someone else. The scared girl from Missouri who'd believed a man's promises and paid for it with years of shame, she was gone. Clara had taken her place. This Clara. The one who threw boiling stew at threats, who survived cattle drives, who loved a rancher and wasn't afraid to claim it. She got up and walked outside. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead. Clara wandered toward the barn, needing to move, to think. She found Elias there. He was checking on the horses, unable to sleep either. He looked up when she entered. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified." "Me too." They sat together on the hay bale, shoulders touching. "I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong," Clara admitted. "Like what?" "Like, what if I'm a terrible wife? What if you realize you made a mistake? What if—" "Clara," Elias took her hand. "Do you love me?" "Yes." "And I love you. That's all we need. The rest we'll figure out as we go." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. Doesn't mean it'll be easy, but it is simple." He squeezed her hand. "We've already survived the hard part. Everything else is just details." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "How are you so calm?" "I'm not. I'm just better at hiding it." He paused. "But I know this much. Marrying you is the best decision I'll ever make. Everything else is just noise." They sat in the barn until the first light of dawn began touching the eastern sky. Then they went their separate ways to prepare for the wedding. The ceremony took place at noon. Tom Henderson's barn had been transformed. Wildflowers hung from the rafters. Benches were arranged in rows. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the walls, creating shafts of golden light. People filled every available space. More people than Clara expected. Some she recognized from town, the ones who'd helped, who'd shown kindness. Others she'd never seen before. Word had spread beyond Black Hollow. People had come from neighboring ranches, distant settlements, drawn by the story of the woman who'd survived and the rancher who'd stood beside her. Danny Reeves was there, along with several other cowboys from the cattle drive. They sat in the back, grinning. Margaret Cole sat in the front row with her daughter, a quiet girl with her mother's eyes and her father's nervous hands. Wade Hollister, the trail boss, stood near the door, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes. Even old Ben Sutton had made the journey, though he needed help climbing down from his horse. Clara stood in the back room wearing Margaret's dress, hands shaking as Vivian adjusted her hair. "You look beautiful," Vivian whispered. I look terrified. You can be both. Vivian kissed her cheek. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. The ceremony was simple. A local judge named Samuel Clark officiated, a fair man who'd quietly opposed the town's treatment of Clara from the start. He kept it short and honest, no flowery language about submission or obedience, just two people promising to stand together. When Clara walked down the makeshift aisle, she saw Elias waiting at the front. He was wearing his best clothes, still worn but clean. His hair was combed back. His face was serious until he saw her. Then he smiled, and it transformed him completely. Clara reached him, took his hand, and everything else faded away. Judge Clark spoke, but Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Elias. On the way, he looked at her like she was the only person in the world, on the steadiness of his hand holding hers. Do you, Elias Mercer, take Clara Hale to be your wife? I do. Do you, Clara Hale, take Elias Mercer to be your husband? Clara's voice came out steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elias kissed her gently. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Clara pulled back, laughing through tears, and looked out at the faces watching them. Not everyone was smiling. Some looked disapproving. Some were there out of obligation rather than support. But enough were smiling. Enough were genuinely happy. And that was enough. The celebration afterward was loud and chaotic and perfect. Tables had been set up outside the barn, loaded with food people had brought. There was music, a fiddler and a man with a harmonica, dancing, laughter. Clara found herself pulled into conversation after conversation. Women congratulated her. Men shook Elias's hand. Children ran between the tables, shrieking with joy. At one point, Margaret Cole approached. That was lovely, she said. Thank you for everything. The dress, the help. Stop thanking me. You've thanked me enough. Margaret glanced at her daughter, who was talking shyly with a boy near the food tables. I wanted to tell you something. What? My husband left last week, took his things, and moved to his brother's place in Denver. Margaret's voice was calm. I asked him to leave. Told him I was tired of living with his cruelty. Clara stared at her. Mrs. Cole, I'm telling you this because it was your fault. Margaret smiled slightly. Watching you stand up to this town refused to be broken. It made me realize I didn't have to accept the life I had, that I could choose something different. What will you do? Run the ranch myself, raise my daughter to be strong instead of scared. Margaret held out her hand. Thank you, Clara, for showing me what courage looks like. Clara shook her hand, too overwhelmed to speak. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching. Elias was talking with Tom Henderson and Ben Sutton, probably discussing cattle or weather or the price of feed. Vivian was laughing with Emma Henderson over something. Danny Reeves was teaching some of the local kids how to do rope tricks. It was messy and imperfect, and nothing like the wedding Clara had imagined years ago when she thought she'd marry Thomas. It was so much better. Happy? Elias appeared beside her. Yes, terrified, but happy. That seems to be your default state lately. Clara laughed. I suppose it is. He pulled her close. Dance with me? I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. They joined the other couples, moving clumsily to the fiddler's music. Elias was right. Neither of them knew how to dance. They stepped on each other's feet, moved in wrong directions, laughed at their own incompetence. But they were together, and that was all that mattered. As the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Clara Mercer, no longer Hale, but Mercer, looked around at the life she'd built from nothing but determination and refused shame. She thought about the woman she'd been, silent, broken, afraid. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd survived fire and cruelty and endless miles of dust, someone who'd learned that shame only had power if you gave it permission, someone who'd found love not by being perfect, but by refusing to give up. The fiddler struck up a new tune. Elias spun her awkwardly, making her laugh. I love you, she said. I love you too. They danced until the stars came out and the celebration finally wound down. Danced until their feet hurt and their sides ached from laughing. Danced until there was nothing left but the two of them and the future they'd fight for together. And when they finally left for home, their ranch, their life, Clara looked back once at the people who'd gathered to celebrate them. Some had tried to destroy her. Others had saved her. All of them had shaped her into who she was now. She didn't regret any of it, because every moment of pain, every instance of cruelty, every hard-won victory had led her here, to this man, this place, this life, and she wouldn't trade it for anything.
The first winter as husband and wife tested them in ways the wedding vows hadn't prepared them for. It came early and hit hard. Snow fell in November and didn't let up until March. The cattle huddled in whatever shelter they could find. The ranch house leaked cold through every gap in the walls. Elias and Clara spent long nights feeding the stove, rationing firewood, trying to keep warm under every blanket they owned. Money was tight. The debt was paid, but there wasn't much left over. They made do with what they had, stretched meals, wore clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore. But they were together, and somehow that made the hardship bearable. "I'm a terrible cook," Clara announced one morning after burning breakfast for the third time that week. Elias looked at the charred eggs and smiled. "You cooked for 40 cowboys on a cattle drive. That was different. Out there I had focus. Here I just—" She gestured helplessly at the ruined food. "I keep getting distracted." "By what?" Clara looked at him. "By you. By the fact that this is real, that I actually get to keep this." Elias crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead. "You're keeping it. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "Promise." They ate the burned eggs anyway, couldn't afford to waste food. Vivian moved into this main house that winter. Her bunkhouse was too cold for a woman her age. She took over the cooking, which everyone agreed was for the best, and kept the household running while Clara and Elias worked outside. The three of them developed a rhythm. Early mornings checking cattle, days spent repairing what winter broke. Evenings around the stove, too tired to do much besides sit and rest. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't easy, but it was theirs. In February, a blizzard hit that lasted 3 days. The wind howled like something alive and furious. Snow piled up against the house until they had to dig their way out the door. The cattle were somewhere in the whiteout, and there was nothing they could do to help them. On the second day, the stove started smoking. Something wrong with the chimney, probably ice blocking the flue. "I'll check it," Elias said, pulling on his coat. "In this weather?" Clara grabbed his arm. "You'll freeze to death before you reach the roof. If we don't fix it, we'll suffocate from smoke." "Then I'm going with you." They argued about it for 10 minutes before Vivian cut them both off. "Both of you go. One holds the ladder, one climbs. You work faster together anyway." She shooed them toward the door. "And tie a rope between you so you don't lose each other in the whiteout." They did as she said. Elias climbed to the roof while Clara held the ladder, both of them connected by 20 feet of rope. The wind tried to tear them apart. Snow blinded them, but Elias found the blockage, ice and debris, and cleared it while Clara shouted encouragement he probably couldn't hear. When they stumbled back inside half an hour later, both of them were shaking so hard they couldn't speak. Vivian stripped off their frozen coats and pushed them toward the stove. "Idiots," she muttered affectionately. "Both of you." But the chimney worked. The smoke cleared. They survived another night. When spring finally came, it felt like a resurrection. The snow melted, revealing a landscape that looked different than Clara remembered. Harsher, more weathered, but still standing. They'd lost some cattle over the winter, maybe 15 head. It hurt, but it could have been worse, much worse. As the ground thawed and the grass started growing again, Clara and Elias began making plans. "We need more income," Elias said one evening, studying their accounts. "The ranch breaks even, but we're not building anything. One bad year and we're back where we started." "What are you thinking?" "Horses. Tom Henderson told me there's good money in breeding working horses. Cowboys always need solid mounts. So do farmers, ranchers, anyone doing business out here." Clara considered it. "We'd need to buy breeding stock." "Yeah, and build proper corrals, maybe hire someone who knows horses better than I do." "That's a lot of money we don't have." "I know." Elias rubbed his face tiredly. "But staying small means staying vulnerable. We need to grow or we'll just be scraping by forever." The conversation stuck with Clara. She thought about it while working, while cooking, while lying awake at night listening to Elias breathe beside her. They'd survived so much. The cattle drive, the fire, the town's cruelty, the brutal winter. But surviving wasn't the same as thriving, and she wanted more than survival for them. She wanted them to build something that lasted. A week later, Margaret Cole appeared at the ranch with a proposal. She rode up alone in the morning, sitting straight-backed on a good mare. Her expression was businesslike. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, dismounting, "do you have a moment?" Clara set down the fence post she'd been repairing. "Of course. Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table while Vivian made coffee. Margaret got straight to the point. "I'm selling half my husband's ranch," she said, "the north section. About 200 acres of good grazing land." Clara's eyes widened. "That's valuable property." "I know. That's why I'm offering it to you first." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Cole, but we can't afford—" "I don't want your money." Margaret held up a hand. "I want a partnership." "I don't understand." Margaret leaned forward. "My husband left me with a ranch I barely know how to run. I've got land but no expertise. You and Elias have the knowledge but need space to expand. What if we combined resources?" "How would that work?" "You use my land for horses or cattle or whatever you want. In exchange, you teach me how to run a ranch properly. We split the profits from anything we do together." Margaret's voice was steady. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm proposing a business arrangement." Clara looked at Vivian, who raised her eyebrows. "I'd need to talk to Elias," Clara said. "Of course. Take your time, but Clara—" Margaret's expression softened. "I'm trying to build something different than what I had. A life that's mine. I think we could help each other." That evening, Clara explained the offer to Elias. He listened carefully, asked questions, thought it through. "It's a risk," he said finally. "Partnerships can go bad. We'd be tying our future to hers." "I know. But it's also an opportunity. 200 acres would let us do things we couldn't otherwise. So what do you think?" Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. "I think you survived a cattle drive by trusting your instincts. If your instincts say this is right, then it's right." They met with Margaret the next week and worked out the details. It took 3 days of negotiating, but they finally agreed on terms that felt fair to everyone. The partnership became official in April. With the extra land, Elias bought 4 breeding mares and a good stallion. He built corrals and hired a young cowboy named Sam, who had a gift with horses. Within months, the operation was running. It wasn't smooth. There were arguments about how to divide profits, disagreements about which direction to take things. Margaret had opinions and wasn't shy about sharing them. Neither was Clara, but they worked through it, compromised, found middle ground, and slowly the ranch began to change. Word spread about the partnership. People talked about how the rancher's widow and the woman from the cattle drive were building something together. Some disapproved. Others were intrigued. More importantly, other women started paying attention. In June, a young woman named Sarah appeared at the ranch. She was maybe 22, thin as a rail, with a black eye she'd tried to hide with powder. "I need work," she said quietly. "Any kind. I'll take anything." Clara recognized the desperation in her voice, the shame in how she held herself. "What happened?" Clara asked gently. "My husband drinks, gets mean when he does. I can't stay anymore." Clara looked at Elias. He nodded slightly. "We can use help," Clara said. "Room and board plus wages." "Fair?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "More than fair, thank you." She wasn't the last. Over the following year, 3 more women came to the ranch looking for work or refuge or just a place where they wouldn't be judged. Clara and Elias took them all in. Vivian mothered them. Margaret helped find them work or connections to other opportunities. The ranch became known as a place where women could go when they had nowhere else. Not everyone approved. There were whispers in town about what kind of establishment the Mercers were running. Rumors flew about the women's morals, their pasts, what they were really doing out there. Clara didn't care anymore. She'd learned that people would talk no matter what she did. Might as well give them something worth talking about. One afternoon in late summer, she was working in the garden when a rider approached. Clara straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. As the rider got closer, she recognized him. Thomas, her former fiancé from Missouri. He looked older, softer around the middle. His face had the florid complexion of someone who drank too much. He dismounted clumsily and stood there, hat in hand. "Clara," he said, "I heard you were here. She didn't respond, just waited.
I came to, Thomas fumbled with his hat. I wanted to apologize for what happened, for how I treated you. Clara set down her gardening tools. Why now? Because I've thought about it, over the years, about what I did, how I abandoned you when you needed me most. He looked at the ground. It wasn't right. No, it wasn't. I was young, scared of my father, scared of what people would think. Thomas met her eyes. But that's no excuse. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Clara studied him. 5 years ago, this apology would have meant everything, would have validated all the pain, all the shame she'd carried. Now it just felt empty. I appreciate you saying that, she said finally, but I don't need your apology anymore, Thomas. I stopped needing anything from you a long time ago. I understand. I just wanted you to know that you feel guilty. That's for you, not for me. Clara's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. What happened between us? It hurt. But it also taught me something important, that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive losing everything and build something better. Thomas looked around at the ranch, the house, the corrals. You've done well for yourself. Yes, I have. And you're married now? I heard that. To a good man. A real one, not someone who runs when things get difficult. Thomas flinched. I deserved that. You deserved worse. But I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I'm just done with you. Clara picked up her tools. You should go, Thomas. There's nothing for you here. He stood there for another moment, looking like he wanted to say more. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. Clara watched him disappear down the road. Felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pain. Just relief that he was gone. Elias found her in the garden an hour later. Who was that? He asked. No one important. He seemed to understand, kissed the top of her head and helped her finish the weeding. That night, Clara told him the whole story. About Thomas, about what had happened in Missouri, about all the shame and fear she'd carried for years. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled her close. I'm glad he hurt you, he said. Clara pulled back, surprised. What? Not glad you suffered, but glad he was too stupid to see what he had. Because if he hadn't been, you wouldn't have ended up here. With me. That's a strange way to look at it. Maybe. But it's true. Elias tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Every terrible thing that happened to you brought you to this ranch. To me. So I can't regret any of it. Clara thought about that. About the winding path that had led her from Missouri to Black Hollow. From shame to survival to something like happiness. I don't regret it either, she said softly. Not anymore. The years rolled by. The ranch grew. The horse breeding operation became successful. Cattle prices recovered. Claire and Elias bought more land, hired more help, built new structures. Margaret's daughter grew up watching her mother run a business, watching Clara refuse to be broken. When she turned 18, she announced she was going to college back east. Her mother cried and hugged her and told her to be brave. The women who'd come seeking refuge eventually moved on. Some got married, others found work elsewhere. A few stayed and became permanent parts of the ranch operation, but they all left different than they'd arrived, stronger, more sure of themselves. Black Hollow changed too. Vernon Pritchard's bank failed in a scandal involving embezzled funds. He fled town in the middle of the night and was never seen again. The new banker was a practical man who cared more about numbers than social politics. A new school teacher arrived who taught girls and boys the same subjects. A doctor set up practice, who treated everyone regardless of their past. Slowly, the town's old guard aged out and were replaced by people with different ideas. Not all the changes were good. Some of the old cruelty persisted. There were still those who whispered about Clara, who disapproved of how the Mercers ran their ranch. But there were also those who defended them, who sent their daughters to learn from Clara how to be strong, who pointed to the ranch as proof that you could survive anything if you refused to quit. 5 years after the wedding, on a warm October evening, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset. Elias came out and stood beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. What are you thinking about? He asked. About how different everything is. How different I am. Any regrets? Clara considered the question seriously. About the pain? About what I went through to get here? Sometimes.
It would have been easier if none of those bad things had happened. But I wouldn't trade who I became. The woman I was back in Missouri, scared, ashamed, small, she never would have survived out here. Never would have stood up to this town, or survived that cattle drive, or built any of this. Clara gestured at the ranch. I had to break to become strong enough to build something worth keeping. Elias was quiet for a moment. You think pain made you strong? No. Pain just exposed the strength that was already there. I just didn't know it existed until I had no choice but to use it. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. I'm pregnant, Clara said suddenly. Elias nearly dropped his coffee. What? I'm pregnant. About 3 months along. I wanted to be sure before I told you. He set down his cup carefully. Then he picked Clara up and spun her around, laughing. When? He demanded.
July, probably. The doctor confirmed it last week. Why didn't you tell me then? Because I needed time to get used to the idea myself. Clara's hand went to her stomach. I'm terrified, Elias. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I mess this up? You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He set her down gently, hands on her shoulders. You're the strongest person I know, the kindest, the most stubborn. You'll be an amazing mother. But what if people treat them the way they treated me? Because of my past, Then we'll teach them to be strong, to stand up, to know their own worth, no matter what anyone says. Elias pulled her close. We'll give them what you didn't have. Unconditional support, protection, love. Clara buried her face in his chest, crying, but this time the tears were relief, not fear. The baby arrived in April, a girl. They named her Grace, after Elias's mother. She was small and loud and perfect. Clara held her daughter for the first time and felt something shift inside her chest. All the broken pieces, all the scars, all the pain, it suddenly had meaning. This baby would grow up knowing she was wanted, knowing she was loved, knowing that mistakes didn't define her worth. And that was worth everything Clara had survived. Vivian cried when she held her granddaughter. She looks like you did as a baby. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. The first year of Grace's life was chaos. Clara learned to function on no sleep, learned to feed the baby while cooking dinner, to change diapers while discussing ranch business with Elias, to comfort a crying infant at 3 a.m. while barely conscious. It was exhausting, overwhelming. Sometimes she cried right along with Grace because she didn't know what else to do. But watching her daughter grow, seeing her smile for the first time, hearing her laugh, watching her reach for things with tiny, determined hands, Clara understood something she'd never grasped before. Strength didn't come from never breaking. It came from breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway, from falling and getting back up, from failing and trying again. Every scar she carried had taught her something. Every moment of pain had shown her she could survive more than she thought possible. And now she could pass that knowledge to her daughter, not through lectures or warnings, but through example. By showing Grace what it looked like to be strong, to be kind, to refuse to give up even when the world tried to break you. On Grace's first birthday, they had a small celebration at the ranch. Margaret came with her daughter, who was home from college. The women who worked at the ranch gathered. Neighbors arrived with gifts and well wishes. Clara stood on the porch, holding Grace, looking at all the people who'd become her family, not through blood, but through choice and survival and shared struggle. Elias appeared beside her. Happy? He asked. It had become their question over the years. Yes. Still terrified, but yes. He laughed. That's my Clara. I love you, she said. I love you too. Grace grabbed at Clara's face with sticky hands, babbling nonsense. Clara kissed her daughter's forehead and held her close. 10 years passed. Grace grew into a wild, fearless child who climbed trees and rode horses and asked endless questions about everything. She had Clara's dark eyes and Elias's stubborn streak. She was curious and brave and occasionally frustrating in the way of children who knew exactly how much they could get away with. Clara watched her daughter navigate the world with none of the shame or fear that had defined her own childhood. Grace didn't apologize for taking up space, didn't make herself small, didn't think her worth was tied to others' opinions.
And that gave Clara a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd achieved with the ranch. The ranch itself continued to thrive. They'd bought more land, expanded the horse operation, even started selling breeding stock to other ranches across the territory. The business Clara and Margaret had built became known for quality and fair dealing. Black Hollow had become almost unrecognizable. New families moved in. Old prejudices faded. Not completely, but enough. The town that had once tried to destroy Clara for daring to exist now pointed to her ranch as an example of frontier success. It would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating, but Clara learned to let go of that anger. Holding on to it only gave those old wounds power they didn't deserve. One summer evening, when Grace was 10, Clara found her daughter in the barn talking to one of the ranch hands, a young woman named Beth, who'd arrived 6 months earlier, fleeing a violent husband. "So you just left?" Grace was asking. "Just packed up and came here?"
Yes, Beth said. It was scary. Hardest thing I've ever done. But staying would have been worse. My mama did something like that, Grace said proudly. Before I was born. She was on a cattle drive with 40 men, and none of them thought she could do it. But she did. I know. Your mother's famous around here. Is she really? Oh, yes. Women talk about her all the time. About how she survived things that would have broken most people. How she built this place from nothing.
Grace considered this. She doesn't act famous, she just acts like Mama. That's what makes her special, Beth said. She doesn't need anyone to tell her she's strong. She just is. Clara backed away before they could see her, heart full. That night, tucking Grace into bed, she asked her daughter what she wanted to be when she grew up. Grace thought about it seriously. "I want to be like you." "Like me how?" "Brave and kind, and someone who helps people." Grace yawned. "And I want to have a ranch too, and maybe learn how to throw boiling stew at bad people." Clara laughed. "Where did you hear about that?" "Mama, everyone knows that story. You're like a legend." A legend. Clara Mercer, the woman who'd once been too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes, was now a legend. The world was strange sometimes. "You can be anything you want," Clara told her daughter. "Brave or kind or both, but the most important thing is to be yourself, not what anyone else expects, just yourself. Even if people don't like it, especially then." Grace smiled sleepily. "Okay, Mama." Clara kissed her forehead and left, pulling the door closed behind her. In the kitchen, Elias was washing dishes. He'd done this every night for 10 years, refusing to let Clara do all the work even when she insisted she could handle it. "She wants to throw boiling stew at people when she grows up," Clara announced. Elias laughed. "Of course she does. She's your daughter." "Our daughter." "Mostly yours. She's got your fire." Clara helped him dry the dishes, falling into their familiar rhythm. After all these years, they still worked well together, still balanced each other out. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never met?" Elias asked. "Sometimes. I probably would have ended up somewhere else, working for someone else, still carrying all that shame. And I'd have lost the ranch. Probably ended up hiring out as a hand somewhere, bitter and broken. We saved each other," Clara said. "Yeah, we did." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Later, lying in bed, Clara thought about the path that had brought her here. All the pain, all the struggle, all the moments when she'd wanted to quit but didn't. Every scar had meaning now, every bad choice, every cruel word, every moment of fear. They'd all led to this. To a ranch that stood strong. To a daughter who knew her own worth. To a life built on love instead of shame. She thought about the girl she'd been in Missouri, crying after Thomas abandoned her. Thought about what she'd tell that girl if she could. That the pain would pass. That she was stronger than she knew. That shame only had power if she gave it permission. That someday she'd stand on her own land beside a man who loved her, holding a daughter who'd never know what it felt like to be small. That every terrible thing would become a foundation instead of a grave. Clara reached over and took Elias's hand. He squeezed back without waking. Outside, the prairie wind moved through the grass the way it had for thousands of years. The ranch that had almost died stood solid and permanent. The scars from old fires had faded into the landscape. And Clara Mercer, who'd survived everything the world threw at her, closed her eyes and slept the sleep of someone who'd finally, truly come home. Because that's what strength really was, she'd learned. Not the absence of fear or pain or doubt. not some magical invincibility that kept you from getting hurt. Strength was getting hurt and healing anyway. Falling and standing back up. Breaking and rebuilding yourself into something stronger. It was refusing to let the world's cruelty turn you cruel. Refusing to let shame define you. Refusing to quit, even when quitting would be easier. It was fighting for what mattered, not because you were guaranteed to win, but because the fight itself had meaning. And some things, Clara had discovered, were worth fighting for no matter the cost. Love, family, dignity, the right to exist without apologizing. The ranch that had started as a desperate refuge had become proof of something important, that you could survive fire and still grow, that broken things could be rebuilt stronger, that the people who tried to destroy you didn't get to write the ending of your story. You did. And Clara's story, the one that started with shame and fear in a small Missouri town that traveled through dust and cattle drives and a frontier town's cruelty, had an ending worth fighting for. Not perfect, not without scars, but honest and hard-won and completely hers. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.